Emma Crawford's hands trembled as she stared at Deputy Collins, wiping blood from his pistol, standing over Robert's lifeless body. Behind her, 4-year-old Sarah whimpered in the darkness. Then Collins looked up and saw her watching. "Step away from him, Mrs. Crawford." Sheriff Morrison's voice cut through the night like a blade, but he'd arrived too fast, his story already prepared. "You're under arrest for murder." Emma's blood turned to ice. The sheriff and his deputy had killed her husband for his silver mine, and now they'd frame her for the crime. She had seconds to choose: hang for a murder she didn't commit, or grab her daughter and run into the unforgiving Wyoming wilderness with nothing but the clothes on their backs. What would you do if the law itself wanted you dead? Before we jump back into the story, comment where you're tuning in from, and if this story has touched you, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's get back into it. Scooping Sarah into her arms, Emma burst through the back door as Morrison shouted behind her. Gunshots split the night air, bullets splintering the doorframe inches from her head. She didn't stop, didn't look back, just clutched her daughter and fled into the Wyoming darkness. Behind them, flames began to lick at their cabin walls, destroying evidence they'd claim later. Ahead lay nothing but wilderness, winter, and the desperate hope that somewhere in the vast frontier, justice might still exist. Emma Crawford had just become the most wanted woman in the territory, and she had witnessed enough to hang the real killers. If she could survive long enough to tell the truth, the hunt had begun. 3 days of walking had reduced Emma's world to the rhythm of her footsteps and the constant ache in her back from carrying Sarah. They'd survived on wild berries and stream water, sleeping in caves and hollow logs, when exhaustion finally overcame fear. Now, as the fourth dawn painted the sky in pale gold, Emma stood at the edge of a vast meadow, paralyzed by indecision. Crossing the open ground would expose them, but the forest path had petered out to nothing. Sarah stirred in her arms, fever flushing her small cheeks. "Mama, my tummy hurts," the child whimpered. Emma's heart clenched. Sarah needed real food, medicine, warmth, all the things Emma couldn't provide in the wilderness. Her grandmother's locket felt heavy against her throat, the last valuable thing they owned. Perhaps she could trade it in the next town for supplies. A horse's whinny startled her from her thoughts. Through the morning mist, a lone rider approached across the meadow. Emma's first instinct was to flee back into the trees, but Sarah's weight and her own exhaustion made quick movement impossible. The rider drew closer, and Emma could make out details that both reassured and worried her. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle, his dark coat well made but travel-worn. A cattleman, perhaps, or a traveling merchant. His face remained shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. When he was close enough for conversation, the stranger reined in his horse, a magnificent black stallion that danced impatiently beneath him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Emma felt his gaze taking in their bedraggled appearance, her torn dress, Sarah's fever-bright eyes. "Ma'am," he said finally, touching his hat brim. His voice was deep, cultured, with the faint trace of an accent she couldn't place. "You look like you could use some help." Emma straightened, trying to summon dignity she didn't feel. "We're managing fine, thank you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm sure you are, but your little one looks poorly, and there's a storm coming in from the west." He gestured toward dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "My ranch is about 5 miles from here. You're welcome to shelter there until it passes." Every instinct screamed warnings. Trusting strangers had never been wise for a woman alone. But Sarah's labored breathing and the approaching storm clouds made the decision for her. "That's very kind," Emma said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to impose." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, standing a respectful distance away. "No imposition, ma'am. I'm Daniel Rourke. I own the Double R spread." He paused, studying her face. "And you look like someone who's been running from more than just the weather." Daniel Rourke's words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Emma clutched Sarah tighter, her mind racing through possibilities. Had word of her supposed crime already spread this far? Was this stranger friend or foe? "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice betrayed her exhaustion. Daniel's expression remained neutral, though something in his dark eyes suggested he saw far more than he revealed. I mean, you've got the look of someone who's been sleeping rough for days. Your daughter needs food and rest, and those clouds aren't waiting for us to finish our conversation. As if summoned by his words, the first fat raindrops began to fall. Sarah shivered against Emma's chest, her small body racked with fever. The child's welfare had to come before Emma's fears. "All right," Emma said quietly, "but just until the storm passes." Daniel nodded and moved to his horse, returning with a thick woolen blanket. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward Sarah. Emma hesitated, then allowed him to drape the blanket around them both. His fingers brushed hers briefly as he adjusted the fabric, and she was surprised by the gentleness in his calloused hands. "She's burning up," he observed, concern creasing his weathered features. "How long has she been sick?" "Since yesterday," Emma admitted. "I think it's from the berries we ate. Some might have been—" "Green?" Daniel finished. "It happens. Lucky thing is, my housekeeper Rosa knows every remedy in 3 counties. She'll have your daughter right as rain in no time." He helped Emma mount behind him on the stallion. Sarah nestled between them. The horse was steady and sure-footed despite carrying the extra weight, and Emma found herself grateful for the warmth of Daniel's broad back as they rode through the increasing downpour. The Double R Ranch appeared through the rain like something from a dream. A sprawling log house with a wide front porch dominated a sheltered valley, surrounded by well-maintained barns and corrals. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and comfort Emma had almost forgotten existed. "Rosa!" Daniel called as they approached the house. A plump Mexican woman emerged onto the porch, her face creased with worry at the sight of their bedraggled party. "Dios mío," she murmured, hurrying to help Emma down from the horse. "This little one, she is very sick, no?" "I think so," Emma said, allowing the woman to take Sarah from her arms. The relief of not carrying her daughter's weight was almost overwhelming. "Come, come," Rosa bustled them toward the house. "Hot food, warm beds, and medicina for the niña. Everything will be well, you will see." As Emma stumbled up the porch steps, she caught sight of Daniel watching them from beside his horse. Something in his expression, protective, almost possessive, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had found sanctuary. Emma woke to the sound of Sarah's labored breathing and the gentle patter of rain against unfamiliar windows. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts. Where was she? Then memory flooded back. The stranger, the ride through the storm, the warmth of genuine kindness from Rosa's weathered hands. Sarah lay in the bed beside her, small and fragile, beneath hand-stitched quilts that spoke of generations of care. Her fever had broken during the night, but her breathing still carried the raspy undertone that made Emma's heart clench with worry. A soft knock interrupted her vigil. "Come in," Emma called quietly. Rosa entered, bearing a tray laden with steaming bowls and cups. "The little one, she is better, see? The fever, it broke near dawn." "Yes, thank you." Emma accepted a cup of something that smelled like herbs and honey. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "Pah!" Rosa waved dismissively. "Children are precious gifts. We protect them no matter what." She studied Emma with knowing eyes. "And sometimes their mothers need protecting too." Emma's hand instinctively went to her throat, where her grandmother's locket lay hidden beneath her dress. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean," Rosa said gently, settling into the chair beside the bed, "that Senor Daniel, he has sharp eyes. He sees trouble, and he sees people running from it. He does not ask questions, but he protects what needs protecting." Through the window, Emma could see Daniel in the distance, working with his horses despite the persistent drizzle. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, confident, sure of his place in the world in a way Emma had never been. "He's done this before?" Emma asked, surprising herself with the question. Rosa smiled. "See, 3 winters ago, a woman with 2 young sons. Her husband, he was a bad man, with fists quick to anger. Senor Daniel, he helped them reach her sister in California." She leaned forward conspiratorially. And before that, an old man whose son tried to steal his land. Always, he helps those who need helping. Sarah stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Mama. I'm here, sweetheart. Emma smoothed her daughter's damp hair. How do you feel? Better. There was a nice lady with soup. Sarah's voice was still weak, but clearer than it had been. Is this where we live now? Emma's throat tightened. Just for a little while, until you're stronger. I like it here, Sarah said simply, then drifted back to sleep. Rosa rose, gathering the empty dishes. Rest now. Tonight, when the little one is stronger, perhaps you will tell Signor Daniel what troubles chase you. He has many friends, many places where a woman and child can find new lives. After Rosa left, Emma sat in the growing twilight, watching her daughter sleep. Outside, the rain had stopped, and golden light slanted through the windows. For the first time in days, she felt something approaching peace. But could she trust it? Could she trust Daniel Rourke, who asked no questions but offered sanctuary to strangers? Time would tell. For now, Sarah was safe, warm, and healing. That had to be enough. Daniel found Emma on the front porch as the sun painted the mountains in shades of copper and gold. She sat in his mother's old rocking chair, her daughter finally sleeping peacefully upstairs under Rosa's watchful care. The sight of her there, silhouetted against the dying light, stirred something unexpected in his chest. Mind if I join you? He asked, settling onto the porch steps without waiting for an answer. Emma nodded, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Sarah's fever is completely gone. Rosa's been wonderful. She has a gift, Daniel agreed. He pulled out his tobacco pouch and papers, then thought better of it. Something about Emma's presence made him want to present his best self. You look better, too. Less like you've been wrestling with wildcats. That earned him a small smile. I feel better. Clean clothes and a real meal work wonders. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, and somewhere an owl called to its mate. The peaceful sounds of ranch life seemed to ease the tension that had held Emma rigid since her arrival. Rosa says you've helped other people, Emma said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel considered his words carefully. Sometimes folks need a safe place to catch their breath. I've got room to spare. And you don't ask questions. Figure everyone's got a right to their story. They'll share it or they won't. He turned to study her profile in the growing darkness. But I've got eyes, Emma. I can see you're running from something. And I can see it's got you scared enough to risk your daughter's life in the wilderness. Emma's hands tightened in her lap. What if I told you I was accused of murder? Are you guilty? No. The word came swift and fierce, carrying the weight of absolute truth. Daniel nodded slowly. Then I'd say someone's made a mistake, or someone's lying. Emma's breath caught. After days of running, of expecting betrayal at every turn, his simple acceptance felt like absolution. The sheriff back in Cedar Falls, he says I killed my husband, but I saw who really did it, and that man wears a badge. Corrupt lawman. Daniel's voice carried the weight of experience. Worst kind of criminal because they use the law as their weapon. Who was your husband to them? Robert had a silver mine claim, a good one. They'd been pressuring him to sell for months. Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke. The night he died, Deputy Collins came to our cabin. I heard them arguing, heard Robert refuse to sign something. When I came out of Sarah's room, Robert was on the floor, and Collins was gone. But the sheriff blamed you. Morrison's in on it. Has to be. He showed up too quickly, had the story already prepared. Emma turned to face him fully. I grabbed Sarah and ran. It was either that or hang for a crime I didn't commit. Daniel absorbed this in silence, his mind already working through possibilities. You got proof of any of this? Emma reached into her dress and withdrew a folded paper. Robert signed a contract the day before he died, with witnesses. It proves he refused their offer and that the claim was still legally his when he was murdered. Daniel took the document, squinting at it in the fading light. This is solid evidence. In the right hands, it could clear your name and expose the real killers. The right hands, Emma repeated bitterly. Who can I trust? The law is corrupt, and I'm a woman with no money and no connections. Daniel stood, extending his hand to her. You've got connections now. Come on, there's someone you need to meet. The telegram arrived at dawn, carried by a writer who'd pushed hard through the night. Daniel read it twice before folding the yellow paper and slipping it into his vest pocket. Judge Marcus Whitmore would arrive at the Double R within 2 days, the same judge who'd been fighting corruption in territorial courts for the past decade. Emma found Daniel in the barn, working with a nervous colt. Sunlight streamed through the open doors, catching the dust motes that danced around his movements. There was something hypnotic about watching him work. The patient way he gentled the young horse, the quiet authority in his voice. Good news, he said without looking up. Judge Whitmore will be here Thursday. If anyone can help us build a case against Morrison and his men, it's him. Emma's heart jumped with hope and terror in equal measure. You're certain he can be trusted? Marcus Whitmore sent 3 corrupt sheriffs to prison last year alone. He's got a reputation for being harder than nails when it comes to lawmen who abuse their badges. Daniel ran his hand along the colt's neck, calming the animal with practiced ease. More importantly, he owes me a favor. What kind of favor? Daniel's smile held secrets. The kind that makes a man willing to listen to a fugitive's story before passing judgment. For the next 2 days, Emma felt caught between hope and dread. Rosa kept her busy helping with household tasks, and Sarah grew stronger each day, her laughter gradually returning to brighten the ranch house. But underneath the domestic tranquility, tension thrummed like a taut wire. Judge Whitmore arrived precisely at noon on Thursday, riding a gray mare that spoke of long miles and careful breeding. He was younger than Emma had expected, perhaps 50, with silver threading through dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of their situation. Daniel, he said, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Your telegram was intriguing. Marcus, Daniel gripped the judge's hand warmly. Thank you for coming. I know you're busy. Always time for the man who saved my daughter from those kidnappers. Judge Whitmore's gaze found Emma on the porch. And this would be Mrs. Crawford. Emma descended the steps, Sarah clinging shyly to her skirts. Your Honor, thank you for agreeing to hear our story. Story's a polite word for it, Whitmore said, his expression neutral. According to the warrant that crossed my desk yesterday, you're wanted for murder in Cedar Falls. Emma's blood turned to ice. The warrant reached you? Morrison's been busy, sent copies to every judge and marshal within 300 miles. Whitmore studied her carefully. Question is, did you kill your husband? No, sir, I did not. Then let's hear what you did see. They gathered in Daniel's study, where Emma spread Robert's contract on the desk, alongside the few other documents she'd managed to save. As she told her story, Judge Whitmore listened without interruption, his fingers steepled before him. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. It's a compelling tale, Mrs. Crawford, but it's your word against the sheriff's, and you're a fugitive. No court will hear your testimony while you're running from the law. Emma's heart sank. Then there's no hope? I didn't say that. Whitmore leaned forward. But if we're going to clear your name and expose this conspiracy, we'll need more than your testimony. We'll need evidence that even corrupt lawmen can't deny. Judge Whitmore spread a map of Cedar Falls across Daniel's dining table, his finger tracing the layout of the town with military precision. Emma watched from the doorway, Sarah playing quietly with corn-husk dolls Rosa had made for her in the next room. Morrison's not acting alone, Whitmore said, making notes in the margins of his territorial law book. A corruption scheme this elaborate requires backing, money, influence, probably connections all the way to the territorial capital. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. So we're not just fighting a crooked sheriff. We're fighting a whole network. Exactly. Which means we need to be smarter than them. Whitmore looked up at Emma. Mrs. Crawford, how well did your husband know the other mine owners in the area? Emma joined them at the table, studying the map. Robert knew most of them. They'd formed an informal association to negotiate better freight rates with the railroad. She paused, memory stirring. Tom Brennan, he owns the Copper Creek claim, told Robert that Collins had been pressuring him too. But Tom's got 2 sons and a grandson. He couldn't afford to fight. Could he afford not to? Daniel asked quietly. Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes. You think they've targeted others? I'd bet money on it, Whitmore said. Men like Morrison don't stop with one victim. They perfect their system, then use it again and again. He made another note. Daniel, you still have contacts in the freight business? A few. Why? Because if Morrison and his cronies are seizing mine claims, they're going to need to move the silver. That means freight contracts, shipping manifests, paper trails that can't be hidden if you know where to look. Emma felt a flutter of genuine hope. You think we can prove they've done this before? I think we can prove they're planning to do it again. Whitmore pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began sketching a timeline. Morrison moved fast to charge you with murder, but he can't hold that claim legally without disposing of your husband's contract. He'll need to file new ownership papers with the territorial office. When? Soon. The longer he waits, the more questions get asked. I'd guess within the week. Whitmore looked between Emma and Daniel, which gives us a narrow window to gather evidence and build our case. Daniel stood, moving to the window where he could watch the ranch hands working in the distance. What do you need from us? Information, witnesses, proof that this conspiracy extends beyond one corrupt sheriff. Whitmore's voice took on the tone of a man accustomed to command. Mrs. Crawford, I need you to make a list of everyone your husband knew in the mining community. Daniel, I need you to reach out to your freight contacts, quietly, see what you can learn about unusual silver shipments or new contracts. Emma felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. And if we're caught? If we're caught, you hang for murder, and I lose my judgeship for harboring a fugitive. Whitmore's smile was grim but determined. But if we succeed, we expose a conspiracy that's robbing honest people of their livelihoods and corrupting the law itself. From the next room came the sound of Sarah's laughter as she played with her dolls. Emma thought of her daughter's future. Would it be spent running from lies or standing proud in the truth? I'm in, she said quietly. Daniel turned from the window, his dark eyes meeting hers. Then we'd better get started. Emma woke before dawn to find Daniel's side of the guest bed empty. Over the past week, they'd fallen into an easy routine of planning and preparation, but sleep came fitfully to them both. She found him on the porch, coffee mug in hand, staring at the mountains where the first light was just beginning to paint the peaks. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, settling into the chair beside him. Too much on my mind. Daniel's voice carried the rough edge of exhaustion. Marcus's plan is solid, but it requires perfect timing. One mistake. We'll hang, Emma finished. I know, but what's the alternative? Spend the rest of our lives running? Our lives, Daniel repeated softly. When had her troubles become theirs? When had her fight become his? Emma must have heard something in his tone because she turned to study his profile in the growing light. You don't have to do this, Daniel. Sarah and I aren't your responsibility. Aren't you? The words slipped out before he could stop them. Daniel set down his coffee mug, finally meeting her gaze. Because somewhere along the way, it started feeling like you were... The admission hung between them like smoke in still air. Emma's breath caught, and for a moment, the careful friendship they'd built trembled on the edge of something deeper and more dangerous. Daniel, she began, but he held up a hand. I know. You're still married in the eyes of the law, still mourning your husband. I'm not asking for anything you can't give. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I need you to know that whatever happens next, you and Sarah will always have a home here. Emma's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't name. Why? Why risk everything for 2 strangers? Daniel was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. Because 5 years ago, a woman and her son came to my ranch. They were running from her husband, a man who'd broken her arm twice and promised to kill them both if they ever left him. Emma leaned forward, sensing the importance of his story. I was younger then, more concerned with my cattle than other people's troubles. I gave them food and supplies, pointed them toward the next town, and told myself I'd done my good deed. Daniel's hands clenched around his coffee mug. 3 days later, the husband found them. He beat that woman to death on the main street of Cedar Falls in broad daylight, while her 8-year-old son watched. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Daniel. The boy survived, barely, ended up in an orphanage back east. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been braver that day, if I'd offered real sanctuary instead of just directions. You can't blame yourself for... Can't I? Daniel turned to face her fully. I had the means to protect them, and I chose not to get involved. Well, I'm involved now. This time, I'm doing what's right, not what's safe. Rose's voice called from inside the house, announcing breakfast, but neither of them moved. Emma reached across the space between their chairs and took Daniel's hand in hers. Thank you, she said simply, for choosing to be brave, for choosing us. His fingers tightened around hers, warm and calloused and steady. Always, Emma, no matter what comes next. From inside came the sound of Sarah's sleepy voice, asking for her mama. Real life was calling, with its plans and dangers and impossible choices. But for just a moment longer, Emma let herself hold Daniel's hand and imagine a future where they didn't have to choose between love and survival. Judge Whitmore returned to the Double R carrying documents that would change everything. Morrison isn't acting alone, he announced without preamble, spreading bank records and shipping manifests across the dining table. This conspiracy reaches the territorial capital. Emma's blood chilled as she studied the evidence. How many families have they destroyed? 14 that I can prove. Look at these shipping records. Silver ore worth hundreds of thousands being moved from abandoned claims. Whitmore's voice hardened. Your husband wasn't their first victim. Tom Brennan died in a mining accident last month. Pete Martinez fell from his horse. All men who refused to sell. Daniel's jaw tightened. A pattern of murder. Which is why we need federal help. Whitmore fixed Emma with a steady gaze. I know a marshal investigating territorial corruption, but to clear your name and expose this conspiracy, you'll need to surrender to federal custody. Emma felt the walls closing in. You want to use me as bait. I want to give you justice. Whitmore's voice softened. It's dangerous, but it's the only way to stop them from destroying more families. Daniel's hands settled protectively on Emma's shoulders. She doesn't go alone. Daniel, you can't... We're partners now, remember? His voice brooked no argument. Where you go, I go. Outside, Sarah's laughter carried on the wind, innocent and free. Emma's choice would determine her daughter's future, a life spent running from lies or the chance to stand in truth. When do we meet this marshal? Marshal James Patterson arrived at the Double R under cover of darkness, his badge hidden beneath a worn coat that made him look more like a drifter than a federal lawman. Emma watched from the window as he spoke quietly with Daniel near the barn, their conversation too distant to overhear, but intense enough to set her nerves on edge. When they finally entered the house, Patterson proved to be a tall, lean man with graying hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. He accepted Rose's offer of coffee, but remained standing, as if ready to leave at a moment's notice. Mrs. Crawford, he said, touching his hat brim respectfully, Judge Whitmore's told me your story. I'm sorry for your loss and for what you've been forced to endure. Thank you, Marshal. Judge Whitmore says you might be able to help us. Patterson set down his untouched coffee and pulled a chair closer to hers. I've been investigating corruption in territorial law enforcement for the past year. Sheriff Morrison's name has come up repeatedly, but we've never had a witness willing to testify. Because they're all dead, Emma said bluntly. Yes. Patterson's acknowledgement was grim, which is why your testimony is so valuable, and why keeping you alive to deliver it is my highest priority. Daniel moved to stand behind Emma's chair. What exactly are you proposing? A controlled surrender. Mrs. Crawford turns herself into federal custody, not local law enforcement. We arrange for her protection while building our case against Morrison and his conspirators. Patterson leaned forward earnestly. I won't lie to you. There are risks, but it's the only way to clear your name legally. Emma felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders like a yoke. What about Sarah? Your daughter stays here with Mr. Rourke and Rosa. She'll be safer at the ranch than anywhere else. Patterson's expression softened slightly. I have children of my own, Mrs. Crawford. I understand what you're risking. Where would you take me? Denver, initially. Federal courthouse has secure holding facilities, and Judge Whitmore has contacts there who can expedite the proceedings. Patterson pulled out a map, marking locations with his finger. From there, we'd transport you back to Cedar Falls for the trial, but under federal protection, not Morrison's jurisdiction. Daniel's hands tightened on the back of Emma's chair. How do we know Morrison won't try to have her killed during transport? Because he won't know she's been arrested until after we've gathered enough evidence to charge him too. Patterson's smile was sharp as a blade. By the time Morrison learns Emma Crawford is in custody, Deputy Collins will already be wearing shackles. Emma studied the map, imagining the journey that would take her away from the safety of the Double R and away from Sarah. How long would I be gone? 6 weeks, possibly 8. Long enough to build an airtight case and coordinate with territorial authorities. Patterson met her gaze steadily. I know it seems like an eternity when you're leaving your child behind. It is an eternity. Emma's voice cracked slightly, and Daniel's hand found her shoulder, offering silent support. Judge Whitmore, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Emma, I know what I'm asking of you, but think of all the other mothers who've lost husbands to Morrison's greed. Think of the children left orphaned by his corruption. Emma closed her eyes, seeing Sarah's face in her mind, her daughter playing happily in Rosa's garden, safe and loved and innocent of the adult world's cruelties. When she opened them again, her resolve had crystallized. When do we leave? Tomorrow night, Patterson said. The longer we wait, the greater the chance Morrison will discover you're here. Emma nodded, already mourning the goodbye she'd have to say to her daughter. But sometimes, she reflected, a mother's greatest act of love was having the courage to leave in order to build a better future. Tomorrow night, then. Emma stood in Sarah's doorway at dawn, watching her daughter sleep. The child's peaceful face was unmarked by the worries that had aged Emma beyond her years. How could she explain that Mama had to leave again? Rosa appeared with chamomile tea. She will understand, mi amor. Children have wisdom we forget. She's already lost her father. Now I'm abandoning her too. Emma's voice broke. You fight for her future, not abandon it. Rosa's weathered hand found Emma's arm. You choose hope over fear. Sarah stirred, eyes fluttering open. Mama, why are you crying? Emma sat on the bed's edge, taking her daughter's small hands. Good morning, sweetheart. Mama has to go away for a little while to help catch the bad man who hurt Papa. Sarah's face crumpled. No, I want to stay here with Daniel and Rosa. You are staying here with people who love you, but I have to make sure the bad man can never hurt anyone else. Can't Daniel make him go away? Sometimes grown-ups have to do scary things to protect the people they love, like when Papa went into the dark mine because he loved us. Sarah considered this seriously. And then you'll come back? Emma pulled her daughter close, breathing in her sweet scent. I promise, baby. I will do everything in my power to come back to you. They spent the precious day together, feeding chickens, picking flowers, making memories Emma would carry through whatever came next. When evening arrived, she read Sarah's favorite story twice before tucking her in. Mama, will you come back? Sarah grabbed her hand. Emma's heart shattered and mended in the same heartbeat. I promise, baby. And then we can live here forever? With Daniel and Rosa? Emma glanced at Daniel in the doorway. We'll see, sweetheart. Now sleep tight. Outside, Marshal Patterson waited with saddled horses. Daniel secured a fresh mount, his jaw set with determination. You don't have to come, Emma said, though her heart clenched at facing this alone. Try to stop me. Daniel's fierce eyes met hers. I've lost one family to corrupt lawmen. I won't lose another. Emma took one last look at the ranch house, glowing warmly in the darkness. Sarah slept safe inside. That would sustain her through whatever came next. As they rode into the night, Emma carried the weight of a mother's love and the fierce hope that justice might still exist for those brave enough to seek it. The Denver Federal Courthouse rose before them, like a fortress of red brick and white marble, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. Emma sat straighter in the wagon seat as they approached, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. 2 weeks of travel had brought them here, 2 weeks of small towns, safe houses, and careful planning. Remember, Marshal Patterson said quietly as they pulled up to the courthouse steps, you're here voluntarily, cooperating with a federal investigation. That changes everything about how you're treated. Emma nodded, though her palms were damp with nervous sweat. Beside her, Daniel squeezed her hand briefly before they dismounted. His presence had been a constant comfort during the journey, but now she faced the moment that would determine her fate. Judge Whitmore met them at the courthouse entrance, his face grave but determined. Mrs. Crawford, I've spent the past week preparing for this moment. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be. Emma's voice was steadier than she felt. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with activity. Lawyers in fine suits hurried past clutching briefcases, while clerks scurried between offices carrying stacks of legal documents. Emma felt small and insignificant amid all the legal machinery, but Daniel's steadying presence beside her kept her grounded. Judge Whitmore led them to a private conference room where 3 men waited around a polished table. Emma, I'd like you to meet Federal Judge Harrison, Prosecutor Williams, and Marshal Patterson's superior, Chief Marshal Roberts. Judge Harrison, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes, rose to greet her. Mrs. Crawford, please have a seat. We understand you've come forward with information about territorial corruption. Emma settled into the offered chair, acutely aware of the weight of their collective attention. Yes, sir. I witnessed Deputy Jake Collins murder my husband, and I have evidence of a broader conspiracy involving Sheriff Morrison and others. For the next 2 hours, Emma told her story in painstaking detail. She described the night of Robert's murder, the pressure her husband had faced to sell his mine claim, and the pattern of suspicious deaths among claim owners who refused to cooperate. Judge Whitmore provided supporting documents, while Marshal Patterson added his own investigative findings. When she finished, the room fell silent. Emma's throat was dry from talking, and her hands shook slightly as she reached for the water glass Daniel had placed beside her. This is quite serious, Prosecutor Williams said finally. The evidence you've presented suggests corruption on a scale we hadn't fully grasped, but taking on territorial law enforcement won't be easy. What are our options? Daniel asked, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Chief Marshal Roberts leaned forward. We have enough evidence to arrest Deputy Collins and several co-conspirators, but Sheriff Morrison is well connected. He has friends in the territorial government who might try to shield him. Then we need to be smarter than them, Judge Harrison said. Mrs. Crawford, would you be willing to testify before a grand jury? Your testimony could provide the foundation for federal charges that supersede territorial authority. Emma thought of Sarah, safe at the Double R, but waiting for her mother's return. What would that involve? Formal testimony under oath, recorded by court stenographers. It would become the official record of your accusations against Morrison and his men. Judge Harrison's expression was encouraging. With your testimony and the supporting evidence, we could issue federal warrants that no territorial sheriff could ignore. How long would the process take? 2 weeks for the grand jury proceedings, perhaps another month to coordinate arrests across the territory. Marshal Patterson consulted his notes. We'd keep you in protective custody throughout, but you'd be able to return to your daughter soon. Emma looked at Daniel, drawing strength from his steady gaze. And if I do this, if I testify, you can guarantee Sheriff Morrison will face justice. I can guarantee we'll use every resource at our disposal to see him brought to trial. Judge Harrison said solemnly. Your courage in coming forward has given us the key we needed to unlock this conspiracy. Emma closed her eyes, seeing Sarah's face in her mind. When she opened them, her resolve was unshakable. Then, let's begin. Outside the courthouse windows, the sun was setting over Denver's bustling streets. But inside the conference room, the wheels of justice were finally beginning to turn. The grand jury room felt like a cathedral of justice, with its high ceilings and rows of solemn faces. Emma sat in the witness chair, her hands folded carefully in her lap, aware that every word she spoke was being recorded for posterity. 12 citizens of various ages and backgrounds watched her with expressions ranging from sympathy to skepticism. State your name for the record, Prosecutor Williams requested, his voice echoing slightly in the formal space. Emma Catherine Crawford, widow of Robert Crawford, formerly of Cedar Falls Territory. Mrs. Crawford, please tell the jury what you witnessed on the night of March 15th. Emma took a deep breath, drawing on the strength Daniel had given her during their brief conversation that morning. For the next hour, she recounted every detail of that terrible night, the argument between Robert and Deputy Collins, the sound of struggle from the front room, finding her husband's body while Collins escaped into the darkness. Did you see Deputy Collins strike your husband? One juror asked. Yes, sir. I saw him hit Robert with something. I think it was a pistol butt. Robert fell, and Collins stood over him for a moment before he noticed me watching from the bedroom doorway. What happened then? Collins looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that told me I was in terrible danger. I grabbed Sarah and ran. The foreman of the jury, a stern-faced businessman, leaned forward. Mrs. Crawford, why didn't you go to the local authorities? Because Sheriff Morrison arrived at our cabin within minutes of Collins leaving, too quickly to have been summoned. He'd already prepared a story about how I'd killed my husband in a fit of jealous rage. Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke. When I tried to tell him what really happened, he told me I was hysterical and that he had witnesses who'd heard me threatening Robert earlier that day. Witnesses who were lying? Yes, sir. Morrison's own deputies, who claimed they'd overheard me say I'd rather see Robert dead than poor. Emma met the foreman's gaze steadily. I never said those words. Robert and I may not have had much money, but we loved each other deeply. Prosecutor Williams approached with a document. Mrs. Crawford, do you recognize this contract? Emma studied the papers, noting Robert's familiar handwriting. Yes. This is the agreement Robert signed with the Silver Creek Mining Consortium the day before he died. He refused their offer to buy our claim. And you believe this refusal led to his murder? I know it did. Deputy Collins specifically mentioned the contract during their argument. He told Robert that men who wouldn't listen to reason sometimes had to be taught lessons. The questions continued for another hour, covering every aspect of the conspiracy Emma had uncovered. She described the pattern of mysterious deaths among claim owners, the pressure tactics used by Morrison's men, and the network of corruption that had made honest miners afraid to stand up for their rights. When the formal testimony concluded, Judge Harrison addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard serious allegations against territorial law enforcement officials. Your job is to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to bring federal charges for conspiracy, murder, and abuse of office. The jury deliberated for less than 30 minutes. When they returned, the foreman stood with a document in his hand. Your Honor, we find that sufficient evidence exists to issue federal indictments against Sheriff Morrison, Deputy Collins, and 12 other named conspirators for violations of federal law, including conspiracy to commit murder, mail fraud, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Emma's knees went weak with relief. Behind her in the gallery, she heard Daniel's quiet intake of breath. Judge Harrison's gavel fell with finality. Mrs. Crawford, your courage in coming forward has made this day possible. The federal marshals will now begin the process of bringing these criminals to justice. As they left the courthouse, Emma felt as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she could see a future that didn't involve running and hiding. It's over, she whispered to Daniel as they walked into the Denver sunlight. The legal part is over, he replied, taking her hand. Now comes the best part, going home to your daughter. Home. The word carried new meaning now, encompassing not just the safety of the Double R Ranch, but the possibility of a life built on truth rather than fear. The telegram reached Cedar Falls on a Tuesday morning, just as Sheriff Morrison was enjoying his coffee and contemplating the mine claims that would soon be officially his. The message was brief, but devastating. Federal warrants issued. Surrender immediately or face armed arrest. Chief Marshal Roberts. Morrison crushed the yellow paper in his fist, his mind racing through options that grew fewer by the minute. Across the street, he could see Deputy Collins emerging from the saloon, unaware that his world was about to collapse. Meanwhile, at the Double R Ranch, Emma held Sarah close as they watched the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. The nightmare was truly over. Federal marshals had spent the past week arresting Morrison's co-conspirators across 3 territories, and justice was finally within reach. "When are we going home, Mama?" Sarah asked, her small arms tight around Emma's neck. Emma exchanged glances with Daniel, who sat beside them on the porch swing. Over the past weeks, the ranch had begun to feel more like home than any place she'd ever lived. "What if I told you we might already be home, sweetheart?" Sarah considered this seriously. Would that mean Daniel would be my new papa? The question hung in the morning air like birdsong. Emma felt her cheeks flush, but Daniel's warm chuckle eased her embarrassment. "Well," he said, reaching over to tousle Sarah's hair, "I'd be honored to be your papa, if your mama thinks that's a good idea." Emma's heart swelled with emotions she'd thought she'd never feel again. "Sarah, honey, would you like Daniel to be part of our family?" "Yes, and Rosa too, and all the horses." Sarah's enthusiasm made them both laugh. Before Daniel could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted the tender moment. Marshal Patterson and Judge Whitmore rode into the yard, their faces bearing news. "Emma," Patterson called as he dismounted. "Morrison's in custody. Tried to run when he got word of the federal warrants, but we caught him at the territorial border." "And Collins?" Daniel asked, standing to greet the men. "Arrested yesterday in a brothel in Silver Creek. He was so drunk he didn't even put up a fight." Judge Whitmore's satisfaction was evident. The entire conspiracy is unraveling faster than we hoped. Emma rose, still holding Sarah. "What happens now?" "Trials, beginning next month. Morrison and Collins will face federal charges for your husband's murder, plus conspiracy charges for the broader scheme." Patterson's expression grew serious. "We'll need you to testify again, but this time it will be in open court." "Will it be dangerous?" Daniel's protective instincts were clearly engaged. Morrison's network is broken. The men who might have posed a threat are either in custody or fleeing the territory. Judge Whitmore smiled. "Mrs. Crawford will testify as a free woman whose courage helped expose one of the largest corruption schemes in territorial history." Emma felt the last chains of fear and uncertainty fall away. "When do we go?" "Next week. The trial is set for Cedar Falls. Seems fitting that justice should be served where the crimes were committed." Patterson tipped his hat to Sarah. "And this young lady is welcome to come along if she'd like to see her mother help put the bad men in jail." Sarah looked up at Emma with wide eyes. "Can we, Mama? Can we go make sure the bad man who hurt Papa gets punished?" Emma kissed her daughter's forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. We can." As the marshal and judge prepared to leave, Daniel pulled Emma aside. "Before we go to Cedar Falls, there's something I need to ask you." Emma's heart began to race as she saw him reach into his vest pocket. When he withdrew a simple gold band, her breath caught in her throat. "Emma Crawford, you've brought light into my life when I thought I'd never see the sun again. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Through tears of joy, Emma saw Sarah clapping her hands in delight, while Rosa appeared in the doorway with a knowing smile. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to a love that had grown from necessity into something beautiful and lasting. "Yes," Emma whispered. "Yes, Daniel Rourke, I'll marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma realized that sometimes the darkest nights led to the most glorious dawns. The Cedar Falls courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Every seat was filled, and people lined the walls 3 deep, all wanting to witness the trial that would determine whether corruption or justice would prevail in their territory. Emma sat in the front row, Daniel's steady presence beside her, while Sarah played quietly with a wooden doll Rosa had carved. Sheriff Morrison, now former Sheriff Morrison, sat at the defendant's table in shackles, his once imposing figure diminished by the weight of his crimes. Beside him, Deputy Collins fidgeted nervously, his eyes darting around the courtroom as if looking for an escape that didn't exist. Judge Harrison presided with the gravity the case deserved, his silver hair and dignified bearing lending authority to the proceedings. When Prosecutor Williams rose to give his opening statement, the courtroom fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Williams began, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. "Over the next few days, you will hear evidence of a conspiracy so brazen, so corrupt, that it strikes at the very heart of law and order in our territory." He outlined the case methodically, the systematic targeting of mine owners, the intimidation tactics, the murders disguised as accidents, and the network of corruption that had made it all possible. When he mentioned Robert Crawford's murder, Emma felt Daniel's hand find hers, offering silent support. "The prosecution will show that these men perverted their sacred oaths as law enforcement officers, using their badges not to protect the innocent, but to terrorize and murder honest citizens for personal gain." The defense attorney, a nervous young man, clearly out of his depth, attempted to paint Morrison as a dedicated lawman who'd been misled by corrupt subordinates. But when Emma took the witness stand, her clear, unwavering testimony demolished any pretense of Morrison's innocence. "Mrs. Crawford," Prosecutor Williams said gently, "please tell the jury what you witnessed on the night of March 15th. Emma's voice was steady as she recounted the events that had changed her life forever. She described Collins's threats, the sound of violence from the front room, and finding Robert's body while his killer escaped into the night. "And when Sheriff Morrison arrived, what did he say?" "He immediately accused me of murdering my husband. He claimed he had witnesses who'd heard me threaten Robert, though no such threats ever occurred." Emma's gaze found Morrison across the courtroom. He was prepared with his story before he'd even examined the scene or questioned any real witnesses. The defense attorney's cross-examination was half-hearted and ineffective. When he suggested Emma might have been mistaken about what she'd seen in the darkness, her response was devastating. "Sir, I was married to Robert Crawford for 6 years. I know what his voice sounds like when he's in pain, and I know what Deputy Collins looks like when he's holding a weapon. I saw my husband murdered, and I saw his killer escape." Tom Brennan's widow testified next, describing the pressure her late husband had faced before his accidental death. Pete Martinez's son spoke through tears about finding his father's broken body and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the fall that killed him. As the trial progressed, the weight of evidence became overwhelming. Bank records showed payments to Morrison and his men from the mining consortium. Shipping manifests revealed massive silver shipments from supposedly worthless claims. Even some of Morrison's own deputies offered immunity in exchange for testimony, admitted to witnessing intimidation and violence. On the final day of testimony, Judge Harrison addressed the courtroom with unusual solemnity. "This case represents more than the trial of 2 corrupt lawmen. It represents our territory's commitment to the rule of law and the protection of its citizens." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Morrison's face remained stone cold as he was sentenced to hang for murder and conspiracy. Collins, who had agreed to testify against his superior, received life imprisonment. As the gavel fell for the final time, Emma felt a sense of closure she'd never thought possible. Justice had been served, not just for Robert, but for all the victims of Morrison's greed. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers. Emma found herself surrounded by well-wishers, people whose lives had been touched by the corruption now finally exposed. Tom Brennan's widow embraced her with tears of gratitude, while Pete Martinez's son shook her hand and thanked her for her courage. "You did it," Daniel said quietly as they walked away from the courthouse. "You brought them justice." Emma looked down at Sarah, who was holding both their hands as they walked. "We all did it, together." The mountains of Wyoming rose before them, no longer a barrier to be crossed in fear, but a gateway to the future they would build together. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning when the aspens blazed gold against snow-dusted peaks. Emma wore her mother's pearl necklace and ivory silk, a gift from Judge Whitmore, who insisted on celebrating their victory properly. Sarah scattered flower petals while neighbors gathered with warm smiles. Marshall Patterson had traveled from Denver, and Tom Brennan's widow brought her children, their faces bright with the joy that had returned to their lives after Morrison's conviction. "Dearly beloved," Judge Whitmore began, trading his formal robes for a simple dark suit, "we gather to witness the union of Daniel Rourke and Emma Crawford." Emma's hands trembled as Daniel took them in his own. His dark eyes held promises she was finally free to believe: protection, partnership, and love that had grown from mutual respect into something unbreakable. "Do you, Daniel, take Emma as your wife, through whatever trials and blessings life may bring?" "I do, with all my heart." "Emma, do you take Daniel as your husband, to stand beside him as partner and companion?" Emma thought of their journey: desperate flight, gradual trust, love blooming from shared purpose. "I do." The ring slipped onto her finger, joining the engagement ring that marked their new beginning. "I pronounce you husband and wife." Daniel's kiss was gentle and full of promise, while Sarah clapped and announced, "Now, Daniel is my papa." The celebration overflowed with neighbors bearing covered dishes and finest whiskey. As sunset painted the sky, amber and rose, guests began departing, leaving the new family on their porch. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked, his arm around Emma's waist. "Happier than I thought possible." Emma leaned into his warmth. "When I was running through that forest, I never imagined finding not just safety but home. You belonged here from the first moment." Through the window, Rosa sang a Spanish lullaby to sleeping Sarah. The sound filled Emma with deep contentment, the peace of a woman who'd finally found her place. "There's something I need to tell you," Emma said, turning to face her husband. "I'm with child, our child." Daniel's transformation from worry to wonder to pure joy was something Emma would treasure forever. He lifted her, spinning while she laughed. "When?" "I think during our journey to Denver, that night in Silver Creek. A new beginning in every way." His eyes grew bright. "Sarah's going to be a big sister." Sarah appeared sleepily in the doorway. "Mama? Papa? Why are you crying?" Daniel scooped her up. "Happy tears, little one, the very best kind." Emma wrapped her arms around them both, heart overflowing. Tomorrow would bring challenges, a ranch to run, a family to raise. But tonight, surrounded by love and protected by truth, she was exactly where she belonged. The stars emerged over Wyoming's peaks, blessing a family forged in hardship and tempered by love into something unbreakable. Spring arrived early at the Double R, bringing with it the sweet promise of new life in every corner of the ranch. Emma stood in the garden she'd helped Rosa expand, one hand resting on her growing belly, while the other shaded her eyes against the morning sun. At 6 months along, she moved with the careful grace of a woman carrying precious cargo. "Mama, look!" Sarah called from the corral where Daniel was teaching her to ride. At 5 years old, she sat her pony with the natural confidence of a child raised among horses. "I can trot now." "Very good, sweetheart," Emma called back, her heart swelling with pride. Sarah had blossomed in the year since their arrival, growing from a frightened child into a confident little girl who considered the entire ranch her kingdom. Daniel caught Emma's eye over Sarah's head and smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. Fatherhood suited him, bringing out a tenderness Emma hadn't known existed beneath his capable exterior. He treated Sarah as if she'd always been his daughter, and the child had reciprocated by rarely referring to him as anything but Papa. "Mrs. Rourke," a voice called from the house. Emma turned to see Judge Whitmore approaching, his face bearing the mixture of official business and personal warmth that had become familiar over the months. "Judge," Emma greeted him, moving carefully down the garden path. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you to the Double R?" "Several things, actually." Whitmore accepted her invitation to sit on the porch swing, his formal bearing relaxing in the peaceful setting. "First, I have news about the mining claims. The territorial government has officially restored all the stolen properties to their rightful owners, or their survivors. Emma's breath caught. Robert's claim? Will belong to you and your children. The silver vein your husband died protecting has proven to be one of the richest in the territory. Whitmore's smile was gentle. You'll never want for anything again, Emma. The irony wasn't lost on her. The mine that had cost Robert his life would now secure their children's futures. What about the other families? The Brennan claim goes to Tom's widow and sons. The Martinez family will receive compensation for Pete's property, along with a formal apology from the territorial government. Whitmore consulted his notes. In total, 14 families will receive justice and compensation. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, thinking of all the lives that had been destroyed by Morrison's greed. It won't bring back their husbands and fathers. No, but it ensures their sacrifices weren't in vain. Whitmore's voice grew thoughtful. Which brings me to my second piece of news. The territorial governor has asked me to recommend someone for a new position, territorial inspector of mining claims, someone who understands the industry and has the courage to stand up to corruption. Emma's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. You want Daniel? I want both of you. The position requires travel throughout the territory, investigating claims and ensuring fair treatment for all miners. Daniel has the business acumen, and you have the moral authority of someone who stood up to the system and won. From the corral came the sound of Sarah's delighted laughter as Daniel guided her through a series of gentle turns. Emma imagined traveling with him, working side by side to protect other families from the corruption they'd helped expose. It would mean leaving the ranch sometimes, she said thoughtfully. Not leaving, expanding your influence. Rosa could manage things here, and you'd have a permanent base to return to. Whitmore leaned forward earnestly. Think of the good you could do, Emma. How many families you could protect. Before Emma could respond, Rosa appeared from the house, carrying a tray of lemonade and wearing an expression of poorly concealed excitement. Pardon, but I could not help overhearing. This inspector position, it comes with a good salary, see? Whitmore chuckled. Very good. The territorial government is serious about preventing future corruption. Bueno, then maybe it is time for Senor Daniel and Senora Emma to think bigger. Rosa set down the tray and gestured toward the horizon. This ranch, it is beautiful, but there are many ranches. How many families need someone to fight for them? How many children need parents who understand what it means to protect the innocent? Emma understood what Rosa was suggesting, a life of service that extended beyond their personal happiness to encompass the welfare of others. It was daunting and appealing in equal measure. What do you think? She asked Daniel as he approached, having settled Sarah with her pony. I think, he said, taking her hands in his calloused ones, that every corrupt official in the territory would sleep less soundly, knowing the Rourkes were keeping watch. Emma looked at the ranch that had become their sanctuary, then at the mountains beyond where other families struggled against injustice. The baby moved beneath her heart, reminding her that their own family's future was secure. Perhaps it was time to use their blessings to help others. When would we start? She asked Whitmore. After the baby comes and you've recovered, say, this autumn? Emma nodded slowly, feeling the rightness of the decision settle into her bones. Then I suppose the territory had better prepare itself for some changes. The Bear Creek mining camp was a study in desperation. Ramshackle tents clustered around a single saloon, filled with men whose faces bore the hollow look of crushed dreams. Emma adjusted baby William in his sling as she and Daniel rode through, their territorial badges glinting in the October sun. 37 claims registered, Daniel said, consulting their papers. Only 12 operational. Let me guess, the rest are abandoned, Emma said, skepticism sharpening her voice. They dismounted near the weathered assay office. Sarah, now 6 and wise beyond her years, helped secure their horses while Emma checked William's blanket against the mountain chill. You folks lost? A grizzled miner emerged, clothes permanently stained with silver dust. This ain't exactly family country. Daniel showed his badge. Daniel Rourke, Territorial Inspector. This is my wife, Emma. We're investigating irregularities in claim registration. The miner's face went carefully blank. Don't know nothing about irregularities. Mr. Emma stepped forward, voice gentle but firm. Jenkins. Pete Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, we're not here to cause trouble for honest miners. We're here to protect your rights. She gestured toward the camp. How many of these men have lost claims they thought were legally theirs? Jenkins' weathered face cracked slightly. Ma'am, asking questions like that, it ain't healthy. Why? Daniel's voice sharpened. Who's making it unhealthy? Before Jenkins could answer, the saloon doors burst open. 3 well-dressed men emerged, guns prominently displayed, authority backed by violence radiating from their stance. Jenkins, the leader called, voice carrying warning. These folks bothering you? No trouble, Mr. Crenshaw, just travelers. Crenshaw studied Daniel and Emma with cold eyes. Territorial inspectors. His gaze lingered on Emma's badge. Come to stir up trouble where there ain't none. Come to ensure territorial law is followed, Emma corrected, shifting William while keeping her voice level. I assume you support lawful mining operations. I support keeping order. Strangers asking questions tend to disturb the peace. His hand rested meaningfully on his gun. Daniel stepped protectively forward. We're not strangers. We're territorial officials investigating claim jumping and fraud. Reports from who? Dangerous edge creeping into Crenshaw's voice. Anonymous sources. We'll be interviewing all registered claim holders. Emma's tone remained professional, despite crackling tension. Legitimate operators have nothing to hide. Crenshaw's laugh held no humor. You folks might want to move on. Bear Creek's hard on outsiders. We'll be staying at the territorial way station, Daniel said firmly. Our investigation will take several days. After Crenshaw retreated, Jenkins approached quietly. You folks got more grit than sense. Crenshaw's crew has run off 3 claim holders this month alone. How? Emma asked. Papers saying claims were never properly filed, owners defaulted on fees, legal-sounding nonsense. Next thing you know, honest miners are packing up with nothing. Daniel pulled out his notebook. Names? Dates? Jenkins glanced nervously toward the saloon. Not here. Too many ears. He paused, wrestling with decision. Old Jake Morrison, no relation to that sheriff, been working his claim 15 years. Until last week, when Crenshaw's men showed up with eviction papers. Is he still there? Holed up in the hills. Swears he'll die before giving up what's rightfully his. Jenkins looked at Emma with approaching hope. You really think you can help folks like Jake? Emma thought of her own desperate flight, the fear that had driven her from everything known. Mr. Jenkins, I was once in Jake's position, falsely accused, forced to run, fighting corrupt officials. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that good people don't have to face these battles alone. I support keeping order, Crenshaw replied, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun butt. And strangers asking too many questions tend to disturb the peace. Daniel stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between Crenshaw and his family. We're not strangers. We're territorial officials investigating reports of claim jumping and fraudulent registrations. Reports from who? Crenshaw's voice took on a dangerous edge. Anonymous sources, but we'll be conducting interviews with all registered claim holders. Emma's tone remained professional, despite the tension crackling in the air. I'm sure legitimate operators have nothing to hide. Crenshaw laughed, but the sound held no humor. You folks might want to consider moving on. Bear Creek's got a reputation for being hard on outsiders. Sarah pressed closer to Daniel's side, sensing the adult tensions she didn't fully understand. William gurgled contentedly in Emma's arms, oblivious to the danger his parents faced. We'll be staying at the territorial way station, Daniel said firmly. Our investigation will take several days. After Crenshaw and his men retreated to the saloon, Jenkins approached them quietly. You folks got more grit than sense, he muttered. Crenshaw's crew has run off 3 claim holders in the past month alone. How? Emma asked. Same way it always happens. Men show up with papers saying the claims were never properly filed, or the original owners defaulted on fees, or some other legal-sounding nonsense. Jenkins spat in the dust. Next thing you know, honest miners are packing up and leaving with nothing to show for months of work. Daniel pulled out a notebook. Can you give us names? Dates? Jenkins glanced nervously toward the saloon. Not here. Too many ears. He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. There's a cabin about 2 miles up Bear Creek. Old Jake Morrison, no relation to that sheriff. He's been working his claim for 15 years. Until last week, when Crenshaw's men showed up with eviction papers. Is he still there? Holed up in the hills somewhere. Swears he'll die before he gives up what's rightfully his. Jenkins looked at Emma with something approaching hope. You really think you can help folks like Jake? Emma thought of her own desperate flight through the wilderness, of the fear that had driven her from everything she'd known. Mr. Jenkins, I was once in Jake Morrison's position, falsely accused, forced to run, fighting for justice against corrupt officials. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that good people don't have to face these battles alone. That evening, at the way station, Emma nursed William, while Daniel reviewed the territorial records they'd brought. Sarah colored pictures by lamplight, her young ears carefully tuned to her parents' conversation. Look at this, Daniel said, pointing to a series of entries in the claim registry. 15 claims transferred to Crenshaw Mining Consortium in the past 3 months, all for unpaid fees or improper filings. The same pattern Morrison used. Emma adjusted William's blanket. But who's providing the legal cover this time? That's what we need to find out. Daniel closed the ledger with determination. Tomorrow, we find Jake Morrison and get his side of the story. Emma nodded, thinking of the man hiding in the hills rather than surrender his life's work. And then we show Mr. Crenshaw that the days of stealing claims with impunity are over. Outside the way station, the October wind carried the sound of revelry from the camp below. Crenshaw's men celebrating their latest victory, no doubt. But inside the small room, a family that had survived their own battle with corruption, prepared to fight for others who couldn't fight for themselves. Some lessons, Emma reflected as she settled William for the night, were worth passing on. Justice was one of them. Jake Morrison's hideout was more fortress than cabin, tucked into a narrow canyon with clear sightlines in all directions and escape routes carved into the rock face behind it. The old miner met them with a rifle in his hands and suspicion in his weathered eyes. You're either very brave or very stupid coming up here, Jake said, though he lowered his weapon when he saw Sarah and baby William. Crenshaw's got men watching all the trails. We gave them the slip, Daniel replied, dismounting carefully. Jake Morrison? I'm Daniel Rourke, Territorial Inspector. This is my wife, Emma. We'd like to hear your story. Jake studied their badges, then Emma's face with growing recognition. You're the woman who brought down Sheriff Morrison. Heard tell you stood up to every corrupt lawman in the territory. I had help, Emma said simply, settling onto a flat rock while keeping William close. Just like you're going to have now. For the next hour, Jake told them about his 15 years on Bear Creek, the backbreaking work, the small but steady profits, the pride of building something with his own hands. His voice grew bitter when he described Crenshaw's arrival. Showed up 6 months ago with fancy papers and hired guns, started buying up claims from folks who'd rather sell than fight. Jake spat into the dust. Then last week, they came with a court order saying my filing was invalid, claimed I'd never properly registered my boundaries. Emma pulled out the territorial records Daniel had been studying. According to these documents, you defaulted on filing fees 3 months ago. That's a damned lie. Jake's face flushed with anger. I've paid every fee, filed every paper, followed every regulation for 15 years. Got receipts to prove it too. Where are they? Daniel asked urgently. Jake led them into his cabin, a surprisingly neat space carved from living rock. From a hidden cavity in the wall, he withdrew a metal box containing years of carefully preserved documents. Emma examined the papers with growing excitement. Daniel, look at this. Jake's got receipts for filing fees paid through next spring. His boundary survey is properly recorded and witnessed. Then how did Crenshaw get a court order? Same way Morrison got his warrants, Emma said grimly. with falsified documents and corrupt officials. Jake pulled out a newspaper clipping from the bottom of his box. Found this interesting piece about the territorial assessor's office. Seems there's been some changes in personnel lately. Daniel read the article aloud. Territorial Assessor Claude Hendricks announces his retirement after 30 years of faithful service. His replacement, Marcus Webb, comes highly recommended by several prominent mining interests. Webb, Emma repeated. I've heard that name before. He's Crenshaw's cousin, Jake said, and the one signing all these court orders declaring claims invalid. The pieces of the conspiracy fell into place with sickening clarity. Emma thought of the pattern she'd seen too many times. Honest officials replaced by corrupt ones, legal processes perverted to serve criminal ends, and ordinary people caught in the machinery of greed. Jake, would you be willing to testify about what happened to your claim in territorial court? The old miner's face hardened with resolve. Ma'am, I'd crawl through hell itself if it meant stopping these thieving bastards. Then we need to get you somewhere safe while we build our case. Daniel studied the canyon walls. They'll be watching for you to come down. I know these mountains better than any of Crenshaw's city boys, Jake said with grim satisfaction. There's a trail over the North Ridge that'll bring us out near the territorial station, without passing through camp. Emma looked at her family, Sarah, who'd proven remarkably adaptable to their unconventional life, and William, sleeping peacefully despite the danger surrounding them. How long will it take? If we leave at dawn, we can be clear by noon. That night, as they prepared for another dangerous journey, Emma found herself thinking about the pattern of their lives, always moving, always fighting, always standing between corrupt power and innocent victims. It wasn't the quiet ranch life she'd once imagined, but it was theirs, built on shared purpose and mutual love. Do you ever regret it? She asked Daniel as they settled down to sleep. This life we've chosen? Daniel looked at their children, then at Jake, cleaning his rifle by the firelight. Look at that man. 15 years of honest work, and they tried to steal it all with forged papers. If we don't stand up for people like Jake, who will? Emma nodded, understanding completely. Some fights chose you, whether you wanted them or not. The only choice was whether to run or stand and face them. Tomorrow, they would begin the journey back to civilization, carrying evidence that could expose another conspiracy. Tonight, they held each other close and drew strength from the knowledge that they faced the future together. Judge Harrison's Denver office buzzed with tension as Emma and Daniel spread their evidence across the polished table. Jake Morrison sat beside them, his box of documents proving 15 years of honest work systematically stolen through falsified papers. This surpasses even Morrison's conspiracy, Judge Harrison said, studying Jake's receipts alongside fraudulent court orders. They've created a shadow legal system designed to steal legitimate claims. Prosecutor Williams examined the newspaper clipping about the territorial assessor's rapid appointment. Marcus Webb was rushed through without background checks. Someone wanted him in position quickly. Someone with mining interests, Emma added. Jake's not the only victim. We documented 17 suspicious transfers in Bear Creek alone. Judge Harrison's frustration was evident. The problem is jurisdiction. Unlike Morrison's federal crimes, this operates within territorial legal channels. Corrupt channels, Daniel corrected. Corrupt, yes, but technically legal. Webb has authority to declare claims invalid, even using falsified evidence. The judge leaned forward. We need proof of falsification in progress. Emma stood, moving to the window where ordinary citizens passed, unaware their legal system was being perverted. What if we gave them enough rope to hang themselves? How? Williams asked. They're running a system. Systems have patterns, procedures, weaknesses. Emma turned back, idea crystallizing. What if we created a situation forcing them to expose those weaknesses? Daniel's eyes lit with understanding. A trap. Exactly. Jake, filing costs for a new claim? $20 filing, survey costs, maybe $50 total. How long before Webb moves against it? Way things been going? 2-3 weeks maximum? Emma looked at Judge Harrison. We file a claim under false names, create a paper trail that forces Webb and Crenshaw to reveal their methods. Entrapment, Williams mused. Risky, but potentially effective. If you're discovered, you could face charges, Harrison warned. Better than letting them steal from every honest miner in the territory, Jake said firmly. They spent an hour planning. Emma would file under her maiden name, using Jake's knowledge to select a genuinely valuable site. They'd document every legal step, creating an unassailable record. When Webb moves against you, Williams explained, federal investigators will be ready to document the falsification process. Catch him creating fraudulent court orders. We'll have grounds for federal intervention, Harrison finished. Conspiracy across territorial lines falls under our jurisdiction. Emma felt familiar fear and anticipation. How soon? Tomorrow. But Emma, Harrison's voice grew serious. This puts you directly in their crosshairs. After Morrison, every corrupt official knows your name. Emma thought of Sarah and William, safe at the ranch with Rosa. All the more reason to end this quickly. Daniel reached for her hand. Together, or not at all? Together, Emma agreed, drawing strength from his unwavering support. Jake pulled Emma aside as they left. Ma'am, I want you to know what this means to folks like me, having someone willing to fight, to risk everything for justice. His voice roughened. Your husband would be proud. Tears pricked Emma's eyes. I hope so, Jake. The sun set over Cheyenne, painting the sky gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new battles in their ongoing war against corruption. But tonight, surrounded by allies sharing their commitment to justice, Emma felt deep satisfaction of a life lived serving others. Some fights were worth any risk, Judge Harrison warned. If you're discovered, you could face charges for filing false documents. Better than letting them steal from every honest miner in the territory, Jake said firmly. They spent the next hour planning their operation. Emma would file a claim under her maiden name, using Jake's knowledge of the area to select a genuinely valuable site. They would document every step of the legal process, creating an unassailable record of proper filing procedures. When Webb moves against you, Williams explained, we'll be ready with federal investigators to document the falsification process. If we can catch him in the act of creating fraudulent court orders, we'll have grounds for federal intervention, Judge Harrison finished. Conspiracy to commit fraud across territorial lines falls under federal jurisdiction. Emma felt the familiar flutter of fear and anticipation that preceded their most dangerous operations. How soon can we begin? Tomorrow, if you're ready. But Emma, Harrison's voice grew serious. This will put you directly in their crosshairs. After what happened to Morrison, every corrupt official in the territory knows your name. Emma thought of Sarah and William, safely back at the Double R with Rosa. All the more reason to end this quickly. Daniel reached for her hand. We do this together, or not at all. Together, Emma agreed, drawing strength from his unwavering support. As they left the courthouse, Jake pulled Emma aside. Ma'am, I want you to know what this means to folks like me, having someone willing to fight for us, to risk everything for justice. His voice roughened with emotion. Your husband would be proud of the woman you've become. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. I hope so, Jake. I truly hope so. The sun was setting over Cheyenne, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new battles in their ongoing war against corruption. But tonight, surrounded by allies who shared their commitment to justice, Emma felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived in service to others. Some fights were worth any risk. This was one of them. The Bear Creek Claim Office was a study in bureaucratic tedium, dust-covered ledgers, ink-stained desks, and the musty smell of papers filed and forgotten. Emma, using the name Catherine Mitchell, presented her filing documents to the board clerk with the nervous excitement of a first-time claim holder. Survey looks proper, the clerk mumbled, examining Jake's carefully drawn boundaries. Assay report shows good silver prospects. Filing fees $20. Emma paid with coins that clinked satisfactorily on the wooden counter. How long before the claim is officially registered? 2 weeks usually, sometimes longer if there are complications. The meaningful pause told Emma everything she needed to know about how the system really worked. She accepted her receipt with appropriate gratitude, playing the role of an innocent widow, hoping to make her fortune in the mountains. Outside the office, Daniel waited with their horses, playing the part of her hired guide. "How'd it go, Mrs. Mitchell?" "Very well, Mr. Davis," Emma replied, using his assumed name. "The claim should be official within the fortnight." They rode back toward their camp, a modest setup that suggested limited resources rather than territorial authority. Every detail had been carefully planned to present Emma as an easy target for Crenshaw's conspiracy. Jake Morrison, hidden in the rocks above their camp, watched the trails for any sign of surveillance. His intimate knowledge of the terrain made him invaluable as both guide and guardian. "Company coming," Jake called softly as the sun began to set. 3 riders from the direction of Crenshaw's operation. Emma and Daniel exchanged glances. The trap was working faster than they'd expected. The riders proved to be Crenshaw himself, accompanied by 2 of his men. They approached the camp with the casual arrogance of men accustomed to getting their way through intimidation. "Evening, folks," Crenshaw called out, dismounting without invitation. "Heard we had some new neighbors up the creek." Emma rose from beside their modest fire, projecting the nervous courtesy of a woman alone in dangerous territory. "Good evening, I'm Catherine Mitchell. This is my guide, Mr. Davis." "Harold Crenshaw. I run most of the mining operations in this area." His smile was predatory. "Understand you've filed a claim up near Devil's Canyon." "Yes, sir. The assay looked promising." "Did it now?" Crenshaw's tone grew speculative. "Thing is, Mrs. Mitchell, that particular area's got a history of problems, claim jumpers mostly, dangerous men who don't respect legal filings." Daniel stepped forward, playing his role perfectly. "Mrs. Mitchell's filing is completely legal, all fees paid, boundaries properly surveyed." "Oh, I'm sure they are. But legal don't always mean safe, if you catch my meaning." Crenshaw's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. "Might be wise to consider selling that claim before you get too attached to it." Emma felt the familiar chill of barely veiled threats. "I haven't even worked it yet. Why would I sell?" "Because smart folks know when to cut their losses." Crenshaw pulled out a folded document. "I'm prepared to offer $500 for your claim, more than you paid, and enough to set you up somewhere safer." $500 for a claim that could be worth thousands. Daniel's voice carried the right note of indignant protection. "Mrs. Mitchell's not interested." Crenshaw's expression hardened. Maybe she should be. Accidents happen to people who don't listen to good advice. Emma forced herself to appear frightened, rather than angry. "What kind of accidents?" "Oh, cave-ins mostly. Sometimes folks just disappear. Mountains can be treacherous for those who don't know their way around." The threat was clear and unambiguous. Emma thought of the hidden federal investigators, documenting every word from their concealed positions in the rocks above. I need time to think about it," she said, allowing her voice to tremble slightly. "Sure you do. But don't take too long. Offers like this don't stay open forever." Crenshaw remounted his horse. "I'll be back in a few days for your answer." After they rode away, Emma sagged with relief. "Did you hear all that, Jake?" "Every word," came the reply from the rocks. "And so did Marshal Patterson's men. That was textbook intimidation." Daniel checked his pocket watch. "If the pattern holds, Webb should move against your claim within the week. Assuming Crenshaw doesn't decide to use more direct methods first." Emma looked toward the dark mountains where their enemies were no doubt planning their next move. Jake scrambled down from his lookout post. "They'll try the legal theft first. It's cleaner and harder to prove. But if that fails, then we'd better hope our backup plan works," Emma finished. As they settled in for a tense night of waiting, Emma reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. A year ago, she'd been running for her life through these same mountains. Now, she was deliberately placing herself in danger to protect others from the same fate. Some patterns, she thought, were worth breaking, and sometimes the only way to break them was to face them head-on. The falsified court order arrived exactly 1 week after Crenshaw's visit, delivered by a nervous deputy who clearly wished he were anywhere else. Emma read the document with growing amazement at its audacious lies. According to this, my boundary survey was improperly filed, and my claim overlaps with an existing prior registration. She looked up at Daniel. They're not even trying to be subtle. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I'm just delivering papers. You've got 3 days to vacate the claim or face arrest for trespassing. Arrest? Daniel stepped forward menacingly. By whose authority? Territorial Assessor Webb, acting under emergency provisions for disputed claims. The deputy was clearly reciting memorized words. Crenshaw Mining Consortium has prior rights to this area. After the deputy left, Emma and Daniel examined the court order more carefully. The forged signatures were skillful, but not perfect. More importantly, the document claimed Emma's survey had been filed incorrectly, despite her having receipts proving otherwise. This is it, Daniel said with satisfaction. Proof of systematic falsification. Jake emerged from his hiding place, grinning broadly. And Marshall Patterson's boys got photographs of everything. Webb's going to find himself in federal custody before the week's out. Emma felt a familiar mixture of triumph and trepidation. It's not over yet. Crenshaw still expects an answer to his offer, which gives us the perfect opportunity to catch him in the act of claim jumping. Daniel's smile was sharp as winter wind. Time to spring the rest of our trap. That evening, Crenshaw returned with a larger group of men, clearly expecting either compliance or resistance. Emma met him at their campfire, the picture of a defeated woman accepting inevitable loss. Mr. Crenshaw, I've thought about your offer, she said, wringing her hands convincingly. The court order. I can't fight the law. Smart woman. Most folks come around once they understand how things work. Crenshaw dismounted, pulling out a prepared contract. $500, just like I promised. Emma read the document, noting how it transferred her claim to Crenshaw Mining for existing debts and legal complications. The language was crafted to make the theft appear voluntary. This says I'm selling because I owe money, she protested, but I don't owe anyone anything. Legal fees, Mrs. Mitchell. Fighting a court order gets expensive real quick. Crenshaw's smile was reptilian. This way, you walk away with cash instead of debt. Daniel played his part perfectly, arguing against the sale while Emma wavered visibly. The performance convinced Crenshaw that he was witnessing a legitimate transaction rather than an elaborate sting operation. All right, Emma said finally. I'll sign. The moment her pen touched paper, federal marshals emerged from concealment with weapons drawn. Crenshaw's hand moved toward his gun, but froze when he found himself outnumbered 3-1. Harold Crenshaw, Marshal Patterson announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, claim jumping, and intimidation of legal claim holders. Crenshaw's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally resignation. You can't prove anything. It's all legal business. Is it? Emma stood, pulling off the dark wig that had changed her appearance. Because I'm Emma Rourke, Territorial Inspector of Mining Claims, and everything you've done here is documented evidence of systematic fraud. The recognition hit Crenshaw like a physical blow. You're the woman who destroyed Morrison. I'm the woman who exposed corruption wherever I find it. Emma's voice carried the authority of someone who'd faced down powerful enemies before. And right now, I've found plenty. As the marshals led Crenshaw and his men away, Jake Morrison emerged from hiding with a whoop of joy. Ma'am, that was the finest piece of acting I ever did see. Emma removed the rest of her disguise, feeling the satisfaction of another successful operation. Acting's easier when you're fighting for something that matters. Daniel put his arm around her waist. Webb's already in custody. Judge Harrison moved fast once he had our evidence. How many claims will be restored? All of them. 17 families get their property back, plus compensation for lost earnings. Marshal Patterson approached, grinning broadly. The territorial government's also reviewing every decision Webb made since taking office. Emma looked out over the Bear Creek Valley, imagining honest miners returning to work claims they'd thought lost forever. It's not enough to stop corruption after it happens. We need to prevent it in the first place. What do you have in mind? Daniel asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. Systematic reform, new oversight procedures, mandatory background checks for territorial appointees, regular inspections of mining operations. Emma's voice grew stronger as the vision took shape. We've proven the system can be corrupted. Now we need to make it corruption-proof. Jake Morrison spat into the dust. That's a mighty big job for two people. Then we'd better start recruiting, Emma replied, because this fight's just beginning. As they prepared to leave Bear Creek, Emma felt the familiar stirring of purpose that had driven her from desperate fugitive to territorial inspector. Some battles ended when the last shot was fired. Others ended only when the last honest person stopped fighting. This was definitely the second kind. 6 months later, Emma stood before the territorial legislature in Cheyenne, her presentation boards displaying the revolution they'd sparked. Baby William gurgled in Rosa's arms, while Sarah sketched the impressive assembly hall with artist's eyes. Honorable legislators, Emma began, voice carrying clearly through the packed chamber. The evidence shows 18 months of systematic corruption that stole millions from honest families. But exposure isn't enough. We need prevention. Governor Hayes nodded encouragingly from his front row seat. Beside him, Judge Harrison served as special advisor on judicial reform, their alliance transforming territorial government. The Mining Rights Protection Act establishes mandatory background checks for all territorial appointees, Emma continued, indicating her charts. No more surprise appointments of unqualified cronies. Several legislators shifted uncomfortably. Emma's research had uncovered connections they'd preferred hidden. Second, an independent oversight board will investigate suspicious claim transfers. No single official gets unchecked power over property rights. Representative Morrison, no relation to the corrupt sheriff, raised his hand. Mrs. Rourke, these reforms sound expensive. Who pays for oversight? Emma smiled, having anticipated this. The territorial government recovered $3 million in stolen assets from exposed conspiracies. I propose using those funds to establish a permanent mining rights protection agency. Using stolen money to prevent future thefts drew approving murmurs from the gallery. Furthermore, properly regulated mining operations are more profitable than corrupt ones. Honest miners work harder when confident their rights are protected. For the next hour, Emma systematically dismantled every argument against reform. She cited specific cases, named corrupt officials, demonstrated how proposed changes would have prevented each scandal. When she finished, applause lasted nearly 5 minutes. Governor Hayes rose, excitement barely contained. Mrs. Rourke, on behalf of the territorial government, thank you for your service and courage. Your recommendations will be implemented immediately. All of them? Emma barely dared hope. All of them, plus one more. Hayes smiled broadly. The legislature has voted to create the position of Territorial Director of Mining Rights Protection, with full authority to implement these reforms. 5-year term ensures independence from political pressure. Emma's heart raced. Governor, I'm honored, but the position is yours if you want it. You've earned the right to see your vision through. Emma looked at Daniel, seeing the same excitement and concern in his eyes. The job meant staying in Cheyenne most of the year, building an entirely new agency, taking on territory-wide responsibilities. Could I discuss this with my husband? Of course, 30-minute recess. Emma made her way through congratulating crowds to where Daniel waited with their family. Rosa beamed with pride, while Sarah looked up from her sketching. Mama, does this mean you're the boss of all the mines? Something like that, sweetheart. Emma looked at Daniel. What do you think? I think this is what you were meant to do. The question is whether we're ready for what it means. Emma understood. They'd built good lives at the Double R, found peace in family routines. This position meant change, challenge, constant public pressure. The ranch? Rosa can manage it. Cheyenne's not far. We could maintain both homes. Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. Besides, someone needs to keep the new director honest. Emma laughed, feeling hesitation melt away. Is that a yes? That's a hell yes. When they returned, Emma's acceptance was brief, but heartfelt. Governor Hayes, honorable legislators, I accept with gratitude and determination. The territory's miners, honest, hard-working people who built their lives with their own hands, deserve protection from those who would steal their dreams. I pledge to serve them with every ounce of strength I possess." As the gavel fell, Emma reflected on her journey from desperate fugitive to territorial official. Sometimes the most important destinations were ones you never planned to reach. 3 years later, Emma's Mining Rights Protection Agency buzzed with purpose. Investigators bent over case files, clerks processed claims efficiently, and a steady stream of visitors testified to their success protecting miners' rights across the territory. "Mrs. Rourke," her assistant called, "the Colorado delegation is here for consultation." Emma nodded, straightening her jacket. Word of Wyoming's reforms had spread throughout the West, with other territories seeking to implement similar protections. Sarah, now 9 and remarkably composed, sat in Emma's office doing arithmetic homework. She'd become a familiar sight at the agency, equally comfortable discussing mining law or playing quietly during important meetings. "Are you coming to the hearing?" Emma asked. "Wouldn't miss it." Sarah looked up seriously. "Billy Henderson says his pa got his claim back because of our investigators." Emma smiled at the pride in her daughter's voice. The agency had restored over 200 stolen claims in 3 years, creating a model for territorial reform across the West. Daniel appeared carrying baby William, while 2-year-old Margaret toddled beside him. Their family had grown with Emma's responsibilities, somehow balancing public service with private happiness. "The Colorado delegation's ready," Daniel announced, "and Judge Harrison says the federal oversight bill passed the Senate." "Really?" Emma felt excitement surge. Federal legislation would extend Wyoming's protections to all territories, creating uniform rights protection across the frontier. "President Arthur signed it this morning. You're about to become the model for mining reform across the American West." Emma picked up Margaret, settling her daughter on her lap, while reviewing notes for the Colorado presentation. 3 years ago, she'd been a widow fleeing false accusations with nothing but determination. Now she shaped policy protecting families throughout the frontier. "Mrs. Rourke?" Sarah looked up with philosophical expression that sometimes reminded Emma of Robert. "Do you think Papa would be proud?" Emma's throat tightened. "I think your Papa would be amazed at how strong and smart you've become, and proud that his sacrifice helped create something good for other families." Daniel moved behind Emma's chair, hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Your Papa fought for his claim because he believed honest work deserved protection. That's exactly what your Mama's doing, protecting honest workers." Through the windows, Emma could see mountains that once represented terror and flight. Now they symbolized home, purpose, and the future she and Daniel built together. Tom Brennan Jr., son of Morrison's victim and now senior investigator, entered with a thick file. "Mrs. Rourke, suspicious activity in Sweetwater Mining District. Someone's trying to revive the old claim-jumping schemes." Emma sighed, recognizing her work would never truly finish. "Same pattern?" "Similar, but more sophisticated. They've learned from Morrison and Crenshaw's failures." "Then we'll be more sophisticated too." Emma set Margaret down, reaching for her coat. "Daniel, handle the Colorado delegation. I need to see this myself." "Always," he replied, though concern creased his features. "Take backup." "I always do." Emma kissed him quickly, then hugged Sarah and Margaret. "Be good for Papa. I'll be back for dinner." As she prepared for another investigation, Emma reflected on her life's strange symmetry. She'd fled these mountains as corruption's victim. Now she returned as its most determined enemy. The fight for justice was never truly won. It had to be fought fresh each day. But surrounded by family she loved and colleagues sharing her commitment, she was ready for whatever battles lay ahead. Some legacies were built in courtrooms and legislative chambers. Others were built in the daily choice to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. Emma Rourke intended to build both. 10 years had passed since Emma Crawford first fled into the Wyoming wilderness with her daughter, and now she stood once again at the edge of the meadow where Daniel had found them, not as a desperate fugitive, but as a woman who had transformed her suffering into a force for justice that had changed the entire frontier. The occasion was bittersweet. the dedication of the Robert Crawford Memorial Mining Rights Library, funded by the territorial government and built on the site where her husband's mine had once operated. Emma watched as workers put the finishing touches on the bronze plaque that would commemorate not just Robert's sacrifice, but all the miners who had died defending their honest claims. "Mama, tell me again about how Papa fought the bad men," Margaret asked, now 12 and old enough to understand the stories that had shaped her family's life. Emma adjusted her youngest son's blanket, baby Thomas, named for her father, and born just 2 years earlier, and gathered her thoughts. "Your papa believed that honest work deserved protection. When corrupt men tried to steal what he'd built with his own hands, he refused to surrender." Sarah, now 19, and preparing to attend the Territorial University, stood beside them with the quiet dignity that had made her Emma's most trusted confidant. "And when they killed him for refusing, you made sure they faced justice." "We all did," Emma corrected gently. "Your stepfather, Judge Whitmore, Marshal Patterson, justice requires many hands working together." Daniel approached from where he'd been supervising the final preparations, his hair now touched with silver, but his step still strong. In his arms, he carried 4-year-old Samuel, their latest addition, who watched the ceremony with wide, curious eyes. "The territorial governor's here," Daniel announced, "ready to make this official." Emma nodded, then turned for one last look at the mountains that had witnessed her transformation from victim to victor. Somewhere in those peaks, Robert's spirit rested in peace, knowing that his death had not been in vain. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds of people, miners and their families, territorial officials, federal judges, and representatives from a dozen territories that had adopted Wyoming's mining protection reforms. Emma's work had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined during those desperate early days. Governor Hayes, now in his second term, and widely credited with transforming territorial government, stepped to the podium as the crowd gathered. "We dedicate this library today not just to Robert Crawford's memory, but to the principle he died defending, that honest work deserves honest protection under the law." Emma felt tears threaten as she listened to the governor describe how her husband's sacrifice had catalyzed the reforms that now protected mining families across the West. The Mining Rights Protection Agency had become a permanent fixture of territorial government, with similar agencies established in Colorado, Montana, and the Dakotas. "But perhaps most importantly," Governor Hayes continued, "we honor the woman who transformed personal tragedy into public service, who turned her loss into lasting protection for countless families. Emma Rourke has proven that courage, combined with determination, can indeed change the world." The applause was thunderous, but Emma barely heard it. Her attention was focused on her children, Sarah, tall and confident, ready to make her own mark on the world. William, now 8, and already showing signs of his parents' sense of justice. Margaret, sweet and thoughtful, with her father Robert's gentle eyes. And the younger boys, Samuel and Thomas, who would grow up in a world made safer by the battles their parents had fought. When called upon to speak, Emma approached the podium with the same quiet strength that had sustained her through every trial. "Robert Crawford was not a famous man," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "He was a miner, a husband, a father, an ordinary man who did extraordinary things when faced with corruption and injustice." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces that included many she'd helped over the years. "But Robert's true memorial isn't this building, beautiful as it is. His memorial is every family that works their claim without fear. Every miner who knows the law will protect their rights. Every child who can sleep safely because justice prevails over greed." Emma's voice grew stronger as she continued. "The fight for justice is never finished. It must be fought anew by each generation, by each person who chooses courage over comfort, truth over convenience. That's Robert's legacy, and it's the legacy we must all embrace." As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Emma found herself standing alone for a moment at the memorial plaque. The bronze letters caught the afternoon sun. "In memory of Robert Crawford and all who died defending the rights of honest workers, their sacrifice ensures that justice will prevail." Daniel appeared beside her, understanding her need for this private moment of remembrance. "He'd be proud," he said simply. "I hope so." Emma touched the wedding ring she still wore alongside Daniel's, a symbol of love that death couldn't diminish and time couldn't erase. I hope they're all proud. They walked hand in hand toward their waiting family, the mountain shadows lengthening around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always new battles to fight, new injustices to expose, new families to protect. But tonight, surrounded by the children they'd raised and the legacy they'd built together, Emma felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived in service to something greater than herself. The girl who had fled through the wilderness with nothing but her child and her determination had become a woman whose name was synonymous with justice throughout the frontier. The frightened widow had transformed into a force for change that had improved countless lives. Some journeys, Emma reflected as they reached their carriage, ended exactly where they were meant to begin. Behind them, the Robert Crawford Memorial Library stood ready to serve future generations of miners and their families, a testament to the truth that even in the darkest times, hope could survive, love could flourish, and justice could prevail. The mountains watched over them all, eternal and unchanging, guardians of the stories that had shaped the frontier and the dreams that would shape its future. In their shadows, the Rourke family headed home, carrying with them the knowledge that they had helped build a world worth passing on to their children. And in the growing dusk, if you listened carefully, you might have heard an echo of laughter, the sound of children playing safely in a land where justice was more than just a dream, where honest work was honestly protected, and where love had indeed conquered all.